Hi, welcome to the Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana. Let's discover new worlds together. Hello again. Welcome back to the Book Corner with Mish Atagana. With me, I am the Mish. It's me. So today we are going to talk about a book that I randomly picked up. I was walking, minding my own business at my favorite bookstore in all the world, which is Foyle's Bookstore in London. And I saw this book, The Afterlife of Mal Caldera. I hope you guys can see it. And it's by an author called Nadi Reed Perez. And I literally just picked it up because it had this whole kind of like skeletal figures on the cover. I know. I go picking a book by its cover, but I loved it. I just love the skeletal figures in this. It looked like a bunch of rock stars, but they were like skeletons. And I read the back, and it had me, and I really wanted to read it. So I bought this book, but then it sat in my suitcase while I was, as my father likes to call it, gallivanting the world. And I finally picked it up on one humid afternoon in Lagos, on a Saturday afternoon, and I started reading. And the minute I started reading, I couldn't stop. It's a story about a young woman named Mal Caldera. Mal is dead. That is how we begin the story. She has died, and she is haunting our own apartment, and she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how. She literally died, and she's there. Her sister comes to take her stuff, and she doesn't know what is supposed to happen after you die and things like that. So she takes a walk to the local morgue to go just, see if there are other dead people. And lo and behold, she runs into two other ghosts. And they try to do a survey because one of them is actually a graduate student who had also passed. And she was trying to conduct a survey on the things that people feel after death and things like that. And this whole process opens Mal's world up into this insane adventure where she meets this guy who is like the curator of the dead in a way. Like they kind of, it's like this mysterious dude who starts to speak to her in Spanish, and then she was like, can you just speak to me in English because I don't know what you're saying. And he's been dead for a really long time, and he takes her to this house, and in this house they have this band. So caveat, Mal is a former almost rock star, maybe rock star, and we kind of follow the story of her trying to figure out what it means to be dead and not do anything. And they're all stuck. So in this house, there's a bunch of other ghosts who have been there for a long time. They don't know why they're stuck. They're not quite sure what happens next. They don't know what's not supposed to happen. So it's a really weird, confusing thing for the recently deceased. And she meets this young girl who, the way she's described, she must have just been a high schooler or just about to leave high school. And she suggests, there's a medium that they can go see. Maybe the medium can help her talk to her family. So Mal really wants to talk to her family. She wants to explain to her sister that she didn't commit suicide, which is her big thing. So we also learned through this that Mal has serious or had in her living life serious case of depression, and she'd at one point before attempted to take her own life. And her big worry now is that her sister thinks she did it, and her sister is the most important thing to her. She is also been disowned by her mother. So this is also like a very like familial trauma, emotional issue where she's trying to fix the issues she has with her family who are still living while she's dead. And in order to do that, she's trying to get a hold of this medium or talk to this medium who thinks he's crazy because he's like, there's no way all these voices I'm hearing and all these things I'm seeing are real. So he thinks he's nuts. Mal is trying to get his attention, trying to get him to kind of, go talk to her family. And it's a kooky story. It's a kooky story. I think one of the things I really enjoyed while I was reading this was just, it's a ghost story, but it doesn't feel like a ghost story, right? Because it's a story about ghosts. All our main characters are ghosts except for like the guy who's living, but a medium, and Mal's sister and Mal's mom. But the main characters that we're constantly engaging with, being Mal and the other ghosts, are ghosts. But it feels so modern and so millennial, for the lack of a better word. It really does feel like a bunch of millennials trying to live their life. Like, they party all night, these girls, they drink, they dance, they have sex. It's very strange. It's like a strange, and they all live in this weird abandoned house that like, when living people come into the house, there's also like this weird thing where it's like, okay, these people are going to come into this place, it's going to be open, and they get almost drunk from the party and the revelry of the living when they come into the space. So it's a really interesting experience in terms of just the way they move in the book. So I think that what makes this book so interesting to me is that Mal lived her whole life very destructive. She was super destructive in life. She didn't live. She was either being chaotic and destructive, or she was depressed and recluse and not enjoying life. Only in her afterlife does she begin to live. And for me, that is such an interesting contrast to the living, or at least to her living life versus her afterlife. She begins to learn about herself. She gets a boyfriend who happens to be alive. Guys, it's a strange story. It's but it's so fun, and it's so weird and kooky, because her and this medium guy, they kind of start dating, not dating, friendship thing happening between them. They build a real connection, and you can feel Mal's kind of, longing for, I wish I'd known what I know now in my death, in my living life, so I could be better. And I really like that. I also like that the enigma, mysterious guy that kind of brought her into this house is also trying to kind of convince her to be part of their little gang, and she doesn't want to do it. But there's also something about him. There's something about him that we're not 100% sure about. We don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy, but we also know he's very interested in Mal. Whether it's actually romantically or is just a case of lust, we don't know. So that is also quite interesting. It's just, here she is in this world where previously she was just floating through life like a ghost. And here, as a ghost, she's living fully and just incredibly. So I really, really enjoyed that. I also love the themes around grief that this book follows. It's not just the living that grieve, right? So the way Nadi writes this book, she writes it like the living don't only grieve. Is he a she or a they? I don't know. Both. Okay, so she goes by she and they. So they write it in a way that it feels so. Anyone who's experienced loss will know that grief is something that stays with you for a very long time. You don't get over grief. You learn to live around it. And the idea that the people we lose on the other side are also grieving the loss of us that are living is very interesting to me, because Mal goes through the phases of grieving for losing her life, one, and then goes through the phases of losing access to the people she cared about in life. And I think, it's so interesting. There's a quote that any Harry Potter fan knows really well. There's a scene where Dumbledore says to Harry, "Do not pity the dead, pity the living, especially those who live without love." And that always stayed with me. And when I was reading this book, I remember going back to that, where, we think when someone dies, they've gone their peace, they're okay now. It is us that are left behind. We must deal with the collateral damage. We now have to deal with the fallout. So in the words of Dumbledore, it is us that needs to be pitied, because we are the ones that are left behind. And if we don't have that love in our lives, who are we? But, Nadi Perez swaps that a little bit, where it's actually even the dead are grieving. Even the dead, especially these dead, they're stuck in this coming and going and not anywhere. And what is their process? Who is their therapist to walk them through their grief? Where is the places they find to kind of go to share in that? Because they're all the dead. They're each other's support group, but how did they begin to find the things to live for when they're no longer living? So things like that I thought was just such an interesting way to think about death and the afterlife. I also like that there are these moments where, she describes these kinds of ghosts. So there's like poltergeists. So poltergeists are almost ghosts that have unfinished business, but they're stuck in the cycle of unfinishing, that they become specters. So they don't exist in the same way the rest of the other ghosts do, who, barring the fact that they don't have a corporeal form, are living, are just going about their day, doing their lives, doing their thing. And the fact that there are moments where Mal gets so stuck in her pain and her grief that she is every now and again on the precipice of becoming a poltergeist. So I also really like that there's conflict for the dead. There's worse than death in this case, which kind of also freaks you out. You're like, wait, what? Like, person is dead. Can we just not be dead in peace? Now it's like, you can't be dead in peace because you might be a poltergeist. You might be this. So that was really interesting. I also really thought the way she wrote that was exciting. I also like the way Mal learns more about herself and her family history through death, because her birth father had died, I think, before she was born. And it's like a whole thing for her mother. So her mother is like a devout Catholic, and Mal being bisexual in the way she's described in this book is something that her mother didn't approve of. And then her mother had Mal out of wedlock, and that was a big issue. So there's all these things that compound. So there's a case of religion in there. There's a case of being from a Mexican family that has these very traditional ways of thinking about things. And there's also, and I think we didn't explore the character of the mother as in depth as I would have liked, but then again, it's only, so many pages in a book. But I also think there's a lot of self-loathing in the mother character that we get glimpses of, but we don't fully actualize. I don't know. For me, it didn't feel as actualized as I would have liked it. And we also see the perceptions of people. So Mal being dead is now able to be in spaces she hadn't been before, right? So she can overhear conversations between her mother and her younger sister. And her younger sister, who she'd always thought was the perfect daughter, who the mother adored, she begins to see that actually said perfect daughter has a lot of cracks. She's the weight of being the perfect daughter. There's a lot of things that for her that Mal thought was, it's easy for her because she's the perfect daughter, has actually put a lot of pressure on her, put a lot of stress on her. And she's trying to find her way, and a way, especially around her grief. She's lost her sister and dealing with that grief. And she begins to rebel in ways that are, very Mal-like. So I thought that was also interesting. Just the fact that from the other side, Mal could witness, her family from a third point of view beyond just her experienced view of them. So yeah. So this book is chaotic. That's a word for it. It's hella chaotic. I feel that the mind of the writer, I imagine the mind of the writer might be a little bit like the way my mind works, right? There are millions of things happening all at once. And the way the story is written, Mal, because we experience the story, predominantly from Mal's point of view. And Mal's point of view is sharp edges. Everything is so sharp. It's chaos, it's pain, it's hurt, it's exhilaration, is intoxication. There's super highs and low lows. And in the writing, we capture that experience. And I really like that we kind of live in that chaos. However, as the character grows and as the character kind of begins to understand and unpack more of their world and their purpose, post, death, we also see the story tend to if level out is the right word, begins to level out a little bit. So from the chaos of the start to the calm and almost, organization of the end, where everything feels good. Mal is still Mal. She's still like this rock star with jokes for everything and a wicked sense of humor. But she is also someone who's gotten to a place where she's accepted what's happening around her. She is in control of what's happening around her, and she's happy in that space. And I really, really like that. So I think the story follows the way the chaos of Mal's mind is working and her emotions are. And as those begin to level out and she starts to find the right kind of answers and peace in her afterlife, the story also is written in a way that shows that really well. So that's also the thing, like, if we go into the world building of the story, is we really do get to see that, like you're in this big city that has two layers. It's the concrete and marble of the living world, and then it's the spirits and specters of the world of the dead all together existing, and you really get to feel two worlds. It doesn't just feel like we are in this big city and they happen to be ghosts. No, it's, you feel this two clashing worlds existing almost in coexisting in harmony with each other. And I really like that. It gives you permission as the reader to not bring in any preconception. So you leave your preconception behind and just, you're in the hands of Mal, and whatever Mal says we're doing today, that's what we're doing. And we're just along for the ride. And I really like that. So the love story here, it's twofold, because so Mal obviously is the center of both the love stories, because there are two love stories in here, even though for the reader, it might not feel like one of them is a love story. But for me, there was two distinct love stories. There's the love story between Mal and Ren. And that is the cookie, actually, no, that's the most normal one. And it's between a dead person and a living person, right? I love the way this is told, because it begins as just these two people, the two really lonely people who just needed companionship. And then from there grew a friendship. And from that friendship, it felt like something else was developing, but something else that had, unfortunately, a barrier to entry, that barrier being physically, they can't touch each other. So that was an interesting love story. But I didn't mind. I know I have a thing about love stories in fantasy, because I'm just like, can we just do the magic and do the epic battles? But this is not a fantasy like that, right? It's not an epic fantasy novel. So I liked the way that is told. And also it's not so obvious. It felt almost, again, it's weird to say those words, but it feels natural when, again, one of them is a ghost, but it felt like something you fall into comfortably. I think about it the way people talk about, if you have a best friend and you're so comfortable with your best friend, and one day you turn around and you look at that person and go, huh, this is my person, and it's just naturally a thing. So there's that. And then there's the almost the love-hate relationship that is, I'm convinced, is built on some sort of weird romantic tension between Mal and, is his name Carlos? The maybe evil, maybe not so evil older ghost dude. He and Mal have this tension. There's definitely a lot of tension between them. However, a part of me felt that we never got a chance to fully understand why that tension existed the way it did. Because I do think he had stronger feelings than he allowed her to know about. Because he's very adamant about just the ways in which he tries to, like, approach her about certain things. But there's also like this other character. I want to say her name was Evie, the young woman who was completely besotted by this Carlos guy. I hope I'm remembering these names correctly because I read this book in July, so forgive me if I forgot the names properly. But I think there's a moment where Mal gets really drunk and ends up in bed with Carlos, and then this Evie girl like finds them and gets super upset. And I think to Mal's like, oh crap, of course I know how she felt about me, I shouldn't have done this. But for him, he was just like, oh, I don't get it. Like, again, guys, men. But I think there's more to that relationship that could have been explored, I feel. So that for me, I would have loved to understand stronger motivation. In the end, he also makes like a huge sacrifice for her, by the way, for Mal. And I'm not gonna lie, I also was like, I knew it. It kind of gave me a thing like I knew he was like crazy about her, and it wasn't just like about sex and stuff. So those kind of things I feel made me feel like those two distinct romance story in there. Yeah. All right. So the author describes this book as like Fleabag meets Beetlejuice. And that is so apt because when I read this book, I think of Fleabag. That's who I imagine as Mal, which is really weird because Mal is Mexican. But I think she's like half Mexican because it's alluded that her father may be like white, not actually Mexican. So it's alluded, but I can't say for sure based on the way it's written. But I literally imagine Fleabag. I imagine Mal with literally her eyeliner running and causing chaos. That's the face. When I read this book, that's the face I saw. So it makes perfect sense. And I do imagine the creepy Carlos guy as a more sophisticated Beetlejuice, but like, without the creepiness of Beetlejuice. Like I see him as in a suit and tie and a little bit maniacal sometimes. But definitely, this book is this is Fleabag meets Beetlejuice. Oh my, dude, yes, it is. And I didn't know that when I read it. I didn't know she thought that when I read it. But this is 100% Fleabag meets Beetlejuice. That is so true. That is so, so, so true. Wow. Yeah, that is so true. All right, so how did this book make me feel? I had a lot of feelings. I had a lot of feelings, not just because it's a book about grief or loss, or a young woman trying to find their way in the afterlife after they didn't find it in the real world. But it also kind of evoked a lot of emotions around this whole idea of a ticking clock about what our life should be and what our life should mean, right? And I've always wondered if, for me, the way, because I live life in a very, sometimes it could be chaotic. Some people might say it's chaotic. I argue with those people because I don't think I'm the queen of chaos, contrary to popular belief. But I do kind of have this, the moment when it comes to what I think about life. A couple of weeks ago, I said to a friend of mine, come to Brazil with me. And he was like, I'll have to take leave. I'm like, so take leave. Let's just go to Brazil. And I got upset with him because he was being weird about it. But in retrospect, I was being weird about it because not everybody can just wake up and be like, let's go to Brazil. I mean, sure, they could, but not everyone wants to kind of do that as spur of the moment. They want to take their time to plan things. And I definitely felt a kinship to Mal in that the highs can be like super high where I'm like, okay, great, we're going to trace around the world for like 7 weeks and see how we go. And then for the next 7 weeks, I'm not going to leave my house. So there's that. And unlike Mal, it's not like where I'm like, okay, I'm at home because I'm super depressed. I'm just at home because I'm just reading all my books and, just like cozied up at home. So I definitely kind of felt that sense of, is there urgency, and at whose behest is that urgency coming? I also like because the big theme here is like, it's never too late to figure out who you are and how you want to be and how you want to live your life. And I really like that. I like that it's never too late to figure that kind of stuff out. I love that this book is kooky. It's so kooky, and it made me feel so good to read a kooky book about less than perfect people just doing their best to survive their afterlife. So that I really, really liked. Yeah. I think when I finished reading the book, I wrote on the IG review, I said something like, this is a bittersweet story about grief and loss and handling and understanding what it means to not lose the people you love as well, but also lose yourself and be separate from their lives. And that's exactly it. If there is no beyond, because that's what they learn, they die and they realize there's nowhere to go, which is kind of an interesting thing, because the theory is there is somewhere to go. Someone's just delayed their departure. We don't know who that someone is. But I think the idea of, that being stuck is also very thematic to the life that Mal had. She was stuck. She was a rock star. Then she got kicked out of her band. Then she had this one song that was a hit. Then it was like a whole thing. So it's also that kind of metaphor for being stuck. When you're stuck, what do? Do you stay stuck, or do you exist around your stuckness and make it the best you can, right? So I think in the end, though, not to give much away, again, some people say I give too much away. Yeah. Not to give too much away, but the way the story then develops to where we get to the acceptance stage, because this book is actually written in the cycles of grief. So first there was like, what are the stages of grief again? So it's like disbelief, the anger stage, the bargaining stage, all of those stages. But we do get to the acceptance, and the place we land with the acceptance, it feels so good. It literally feels like Mal's life is just about to begin. The way that, and that's how the story ends. It literally ends like, and everyone around her, both Ren and her sister and all these, characters we've come to love, they're in a place that feels good to the reader. They feel like they're about to begin an incredible journey. It might end really well. It might end badly, but it's their choice what's about to happen next. And I think that's a really good space to be. Yeah, so I think, the story of Mal is the story of so many people. And I like that when talking about this, the writer talks about how, the process of writing this book for her was like, what was it? Exercising her inner demons onto a page and hoping the ensuing battle will be entertaining. And it is very entertaining. Like I said, this book is kooky. But I think for any writer, when you put something this emotional and this almost cathartic in a way, because I do, when I think about the relationship between Mal and her mother and the fact that she didn't know who her father was, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of emotional, baggage that Mal has dealt with either through humor or through alcohol. In this case, where for any writer to put those kind of things down to page, to be able to express those in such a visceral and emotive way, it is going to do battle on the page. And I think that has come out really, really well. It is not, I'm so glad that I picked up this book. It is not usually the kind of, fantasy that I would have ordinarily picked up if someone hadn't recommended it. And I loved that I saw this and I wanted to know what it was about without it being recommended to me. As you guys remember from last season, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was one of my favorite books that I read in 2023. And I picked up that book because I think it was the sales clerk at Exclusive Books had said to me, Mish, I think you're going to like this book because I know how much you like fantasy, but it's not like, it's not like deep, big magic and like epic fantasy stuff, but I think you're going to like it. And I've also kind of, challenged myself to find more stories like that where the fantasy element is subtle, but it's there. It's like this otherworldly thing that exists in the real world as opposed to a whole epic world that is built specifically for the fantasy. So I really like that. I like that it's the story of a person. We just experiencing it from their afterlife. So that was really, really cool for me. Cool. So, guys, that's episode 2. Thank you so much again for listening with me. I really, again, guys, I'm going to need y'all to follow this podcast because I want people to send me more books, So this, the Afterlife of Mal Caldera was published by Titan Books. And I really, really, think it's a good book. So go get it. But please follow my podcast. Go onto TikTok, Books and Sneakers, for my book recommendations and my sneaker recommendations for those of you that love sneakers, and tell me what books I should be reading. See you next time. And we out.